I'm Ben Sheard.
And I'm James Devine.
And welcome to The Sporting Blueprint.
Our first guest is the legendary Peter Drury, a sporting commentator most known for his work within the world of football.
The owner of football's most iconic lines, Peter has worked for Sky and is currently at NBC and has been at the last 3 Football World Cup finals.
It was an absolute privilege to speak to Peter, so we'll hand over to our conversation right now.
As my first word so far, I'd like to thank you, Peter, for your time. We appreciate it a lot.
Thanks, James.
I'd like to bring you back to the start of your sports journalism career then, getting into it. We know in this industry it can be hard to get your foot in the door, standing out. So what was it to you that first got you involved in the industry, and how did you stamp your authority on it?
The second question is a hard one to answer because I don't really feel as if I've ever stamped any authority on anything, to be honest. But I can tell you how I got into it, and I got lucky. And you guys, you're right to say it's a very competitive industry, and that getting your foot in the door is often the toughest bit. And that was true 37 years ago or whatever it was when I started trying to do that, as I know it is for you guys now who are aspiring to get in. And I totally empathize with you. I came out of university and was briefly an accountant, and I wasn't very good at that. And I kind of followed the dream. I had done, at the end of my career, a little bit of cricket commentary on a sort of ringing telephone service that existed in those days. But really, sports journalism and broadcasting was nothing more than a pipe dream. I didn't take it seriously. My degree was in politics. And then I began applying for jobs without anything like the right qualification. I had these I had piled up on my bedside table letters of rejection. And eventually I got a chance with a very well-known sports agency in London called Haters, led by a guy who was a legend on Fleet Street, as was back in the day, called Reg Hater. And he gave me a grounding, a sort of an apprenticeship, a couple of years working on the job, and getting paid for it. Not getting paid a huge amount, but getting experience which was priceless. Off the back of which I was able to apply for a job with BBC Local Radio, right where you are now in Leeds. And that was my first broadcasting job in 1990. And I was lucky Leeds got promoted that year, Leeds United. And 2 years later, they were champions while I was on the patch. And that was a very fortunate professional break. Because Leeds, the local sporting patch of Leeds, became so prominent in that time, my work, I guess, was more noticed by people, Broadcasting House, London, the network. And I was lucky to be one of the young sort of cabs ready to come off the rank just as 5 Live was beginning. And so I was sort of a founder member of all that. And that was a time of mushrooming opportunity in the media industry, sports media industry, because satellite television was just beginning then as well. So there was suddenly an explosion of opportunity at just the right time for me. And so, as you put it quite rightly, I got my foot in the door, and it went from there.
Absolutely. You touched on there, you did radio commentary. How much harder is radio compared to television commentary?
It's neither harder nor easier, Ben. It's just different. It's a very different skill set, actually.
Yeah.
Radio is nothing without the commentator. Obviously, the commentator is everything.
Yeah.
Without him or her, you don't know what's going on. And so radio is a blank canvas. And actually, for someone like me who loves words, it's a fabulous blank canvas because it's all yours. And the ability to describe and to emote is really great. You can indulge, as opposed to television, which in some ways is a much more disciplined craft, because you have to work within the pictures. You are an addition to the pictures. And very often you can commentate on a football match on television and think, well, actually, the vast majority of my audience can see for themselves and know everything I'm telling them. And so in television, and it takes a long time to learn if you've done radio, in television, knowing when not to talk is quite important, because you become, and we all have as commentators, an irritant. You know, you're there too much. Shut up. Let me enjoy it for myself. And you learn to sort of ride on the moments. Let the moments come, hopefully find some words to go with them. So they're two very, very different things. Actually, people don't always appreciate that. That's not to say there aren't obviously some shared skills within them both, but a lot of what you look to do on radio, you look not to do on television, and vice versa.
Yeah, I bet. And you said you've got away with words. You've come up with some of the most iconic lines of commentary. How do you do it? Is it just off the cuff, or is it all planned and prepped?
Oh no, well, I have a very strict rule that nothing that happens between the first whistle and the last whistle can possibly be planned and prepped. You're a fool if you try to preempt what you think might happen within a football match, because even if you're right, even if you go to bed one night and say to yourself, listen, if Leeds score the winner in the first minute, this is what I'm going to do. And they the winner in the 91st minute, but your vision of it wouldn't necessarily be how it actually plays out.
Yeah.
And so it won't feel or sound authentic when it actually happens. So anything that happens within the game has to be in the moment. You know, you have to just trust yourself to go with it. Now that's not to say that you can't have a kind of cloud full of thoughts. Of course you do. I mean, fans have a cloud full of thoughts. Everybody does. What if this happens? What if that happens? But to have it ready in front of you as if this is what I will say if this happens, that's a dangerous place to be. Obviously, when the team's in the tunnel and they're walking out and all of that, you know that's going to happen. That's a given. That's what I call a set piece. And you can, to some extent, be ready for that, just as you can and ought to be ready for at least in a position to know for sure what, if Leeds win, this is what it means. So as the final whistle goes, Leeds are back on top of the league, or, you know, Leeds are going down, or Leeds, you know, all of that sort of stuff. You need to have right at the front of your head. And if that means writing it in capital letters in front of you, well, fine. So yeah, the moments, the big moments in a game, you have to trust yourself to deal with as and when they happen.
Yeah.
On the topic of the one-liners, do you have any particular favourites that you've come up with over the years?
James, I always decline to answer that question, only because it's a great belief of mine, and I'm not being falsely modest here, that the moments belong to the sports people. You know, Aguero scored the goal. Nobody else did. It was nothing to do with the commentator. And to be self-congratulatory around the moment, which is a great sporting moment, is to somehow appear to try and claim it as your own. It is not. A commentator's job is just to eavesdrop on a sporting event and then to articulate it. So I would not want to claim for myself a moment. It would be not just immodest, but it would be, or indulgent. It would just be a skewing of reality. You know, you cannot pretend that a goal being scored belongs to whoever happens to be broadcasting the goal. It belongs to whoever scored the goal and their teammates and so on. So for that reason, and because it does feel arrogant to quote yourself back, I swerve that question.
Fair enough.
I guess that's fair enough. When explained like that, that's very fair enough.
Yeah.
Something I'd like to touch on with you, you were saying before, a couple of words, luck. You were lucky to work here and there. Obviously, across your career, you've worked for big companies, a big stint at the ITV, Sky, and now you're working abroad in America. Do you have any particular favourite experiences, favourite grounds you've so just talk to us about your career as a whole and how you feel that's panned out.
Well, it's panned out beyond what I could possibly have expected, and beyond what I did expect. And yeah, I've had a great series of things that have turned out to be great happy memories in my life. Going back to my days again in the city you're talking to me from now, in Leeds, where I was on top of City Hall watching the open top bus drive through when Leeds won the league in 1992, commentating on or three, whatever it was, on Howard Wilkinson and Eric Cantona and all of those great players of Leeds back in that famous time. And going abroad to Stuttgart in the European Cup when Leeds played in that competition. That was the first time I flew abroad. I'd never been on holiday abroad with my family. First time I got on an aeroplane was with Leeds United. So those are great memories. And then opportunities I had on the radio, football of course, but I mean I commentated on Ryder Cups on 5 Live and works at Wimbledon and that sort of thing. All the cricket I did when I was following Yorkshire, and then going into television. And I've been to every Football World Cup since 1998, and I've commentated on the last 3 finals. It's memory after memory, really. And I don't feel as I've kind of deserved any of it, but it's just sort of fallen my way. And so when someone like you asks me that question, I find myself pinching myself, because I've just been a very, very fortunate guy. All the Champions League games I did with ITV, in all the greatest stadia in Europe, and indeed through my freelance years when I was working for BT, what's now TNT. I continued to go to venues all over Europe, and now I'm in a position, as I was when I was working for PLP, the company that broadcasts the Premier League around the world. Now here I am with Sky, and as you say, with NBC in America, going to the best Premier League games every weekend, and I just count my blessings. That's all, and I just hope I can scramble on and keep doing it for a few more years.
You said you've been to the best stadia in Europe. What was it like when in that night in Rome, when obviously Manolas scored? Did you have a clue what was going on because it was a bit of a mess, or because you can't?
No, I didn't have a clue. That's the joy of that moment, Ben. You see, because you couldn't possibly be ready for that moment. You couldn't possibly. A Greek centre half who almost never scores a goal, and not just any goal, but a goal that means that Roma have made up a 3-goal deficit on Barcelona, the great Barcelona, by the way, with Messi and co. And that was impossible. It just couldn't happen. And because it was such an improbable goal scorer, and actually he scored it in a near post sort of melee with players all around him. And when he scored, I didn't know it was him. So it needed a word or two to begin with anyway, just to wait until I could see a close up and a replay to show me who had scored. And I suppose I just went off on one, really. and I had no idea in the moment, or as I left the stadium and I went back to my hotel, I had no idea. I wasn't on social media, and I'm still not on social media now. I had no idea that it was beyond. It had gone beyond any other goal, really. That it had somehow impacted. Clearly, it did, and that's a lovely thing. But it was just planets coming together in a very strange and, for me, very fortunate way.
I think that's something a lot of people really love, is the spontaneity about your style as well. The fact you can come up with a Greek god in Rome on the spot is something quite extraordinary.
The funny thing about that, James, is that Manolas scored this goal, and it goes in, and I think, what the hell do I know about Manolas? And all I could think of was he's Greek. You know, he's Greek. I know he's Greek, and here we are in Rome, and those are the two great ancient civilizations. And so I sort of dug back to something in my school days, and out it came. You know, but if you listen to it, which I don't, but if you listen to it, I mean, it's a weird series of words, really. But it clearly, I can't pretend otherwise, because people are still asking me about it, as you are. It clearly made its mark, but it was a fluke.
You've had an incredible career so far in the world of sport. What does it mean to you when I say the elite world of sport?
Oh, wow. You mean in my context, or the context of the whole world, as it were?
Both.
Well, in my context, I would say that it is something which I've been privileged to cling to be honest. I don't, the job of the broadcaster is just to articulate an event that's going on. And so I've been just lucky to watch elite sport for a living. And principally, of course, that's been football. And I've been to see it. In the broadest terms, it is an extraordinary thing to behold. Whatever your sport happens to be, to see the best people in the world playing the best games in the world in the best possible way, is something we must never, and I certainly never would, take for granted.
And what about in a worldwide context then? What would you say the elite world of sport's like there?
I mean, wow, that is a huge question. I guess it looks different wherever you're looking at it from. I mean, in India, for instance, you'd be talking Virat Kohli, the great cricketers. You know, in Australia, there'd be a very different perspective of rugby and cricket from what we see. They're a great rivalrous nation. In our country, we worship our top footballers, and we also, by the way, have a great breadth of sporting love. You know, the emotional investment in the Olympic Games, for instance, in our country, I think is barely matched anywhere else in the world. You know, we learn to love our sporting heroes in the moment, and some of them, you know, get left behind by history, and others remain part of our dialogue forever. So, yeah, I mean, the lovely thing about sport is that it's unifying. It brings us together. It's the reason I'm talking to you guys and you're talking to me, because we all love sport. And it enables us to come together. It enables us to have great, friendly, rivalrous conversations, great rows, debates about who's the greatest and who's not the greatest, and so on. But beyond all of that, I would say it just gives us a spectacle and something to become emotionally attached to, which frankly improves the world. Sport does a whole lot for the world that politics can't. For instance, it's so much more unifying. You know, it brings people together in a way that very little else. People might say music, the arts. I get that. I wouldn't argue with that. But sport does for the world what nothing else can.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, you mentioned about going back to your school days and stuff like that. If you were to go back to people like us in technically our school and educational days, what advice would you give to somebody who's aiming to get into the industry that obviously we're trying to get into and that you're into, to be the next Peter Drury, is it maybe?
Well, honestly, I would say, first of all, check how much you really want it. And I know you do. I'm not doubting it. But unless your desire is real, you know, you're going to be overtaken by someone whose desire is greater than yours. You have to really want it, and I'm sure you do. Beyond that, never say no to anything, because you never know which is the opportunity that gets your foot in the door. Never stop learning. Always be humble enough to listen and be told. But at the same time, ultimately, be authentic and be true to yourself, and know the way you like to do it, and be prepared to do it. And sometimes you might take a bit of a hit for doing it your way. But I think people will see through you if you try to pretend to be someone else, if you mimic someone, if you put on a show that isn't really you. You'll be transparent. So I guess the big overarching piece of advice would be stay authentic, believe in yourself. And sometimes that's hard because you do get criticized, and that's understandable because these things are often down to taste. But stick to who you think you are, or stick to who you know you are. And if you're real, I'm sure there's a way forward.
And what would you say to a young Peter Drury then? Would you give that advice to the exact same situation, or?
Yeah, well, if you're talking about me and allowing me to be self-indulgent, what I would say to myself is grow a thicker skin, because I haven't got a thick skin, and sometimes I can be too easily hurt, and B, worry less. Because all through my career, I've worried about the next thing and worried about the next thing and been anxious, and I still to this day get very, very nervous before a game. And I wish I could just shake it off and enjoy each moment more. I guess that's just me. That's my shortcoming. That's who I am. And there are people who do the same job as me who are much more comfortable with all that comes with it, and with all that goes around it. If I could shake off my anxiety and my anything other than, I enjoyed the journey. To say I haven't, it's been one, but my 80-year-old self would be fantastic. Enjoy it now. Don't worry about what's happening. Enjoy it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And about how racism become,
Really, it hurts. That's and listen, criticism is often fair. I'm not saying it's unwarranted criticism, but when you do put yourself out there and you try your hardest and you do your best, and then you hear that someone thinks it wasn't up to much, that hurts. That hurts in any walk of life, doesn't it?
yeah,
If you handed a piece of work to someone, as you study, and you think, oh, I'm really pleased with that. I've put my heart and soul into it, and then somebody says, not for me. That hurts. And of course, in what I do, quite often the criticism is public, so that I find difficult. I find, but that's not to say I don't take fair criticism. If I see criticism, I think, do you know what, perhaps they've got a point, then I try to take it on board. If I think it's unfair, it hurts even more, and I sulk. And that happens too. You see things. What is that about? That's just wrong, and that really does hurt. But actually, the most important criticism is the criticism that one has for oneself, and I'm very self-critical. I absolutely rip myself to shreds. And most important of all, you've got to hear what the boss says, and if the boss is happy, that'll do.
yeah.
Fair enough. One thing I'd like to ask is, in terms of something we'd like to ask all our guests as we move forward, is that if you were in our position starting out in sports journalism, or if you were to have a podcast like we're hopefully trying to grow, if you could pick the brains of anybody in the sporting world, past or present, who would you really like to speak to?
Gareth Southgate.
Yeah.
If we're talking sort of past stroke present, only because I believe that don't say only, because I believe he is, certainly within the mad world of English football, the embodiment of everything I'd want to be. That is a guy who is humble, intelligent, articulate, human, empathetic, and who has gone with the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and misfortune in a way which I think sets an example to anybody and everybody in sport. And he made the England shirt wearable again. He made following England a joy again. And he did it with the most remarkable humanity. And by the way, he dealt with criticism. Wow. I mean, imagine being him sometimes. And this is what a great example. He dealt with everything, and he did it with such remarkable poise. So there's the answer to your question. I think he is the modern example of how sport should be.
That'd be a great conversation. I'd love to be a fly on the wall for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so would I. Thank you very much for your time today, Peter. I've got nothing further to add. I don't know about James, but that has been really insightful, and it's a great way to kickstart our first episode of the Sporting Blueprint. So thank you very much for your time.
You're very welcome, Ben, and so are you, James. Really good to talk to you, and good luck with your studies. And I look forward to seeing you on the circuit in a few years' time.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure, Peter. Thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we will see you on the circuit at some point.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. All
Cheers,
the best.
Peter.
James, what an honour that was.
Yeah, what a conversation. For anybody that's enjoyed that, make sure you save if you're on Spotify and subscribe and turn on the notifications on YouTube so you don't miss another episode of the Sporting Blueprint.
Thank you for your time.
And we'll catch you in the next one.